Well, it's lovely to see you all here today. It's my first visit to Arkansas, and I'm really, really thrilled and excited. I got here very early this morning, like 2 o'clock in the morning, but I've been very well looked after since, and it's just lovely to be with my good friends, P. Allen and Tom. Today I'm going to show you where I live, which is Helmingham Hall. It's in Suffolk, in the region of East Anglia, which is the little bit that juts out north of London and is the closest thing to Siberia. That's what we feel when the winds are blowing. But most of all, I want to explain to you about the garden and the philosophy of the garden and the workings of it. But essentially, it's a private home. We have lived in there. My parents-in-law restored it, it wasn't lived in for 40 years, and my parents-in-law restored it and got water and electricity back, and we were able to come and really use it as a family home. Dogs are running around the place, and children and toys and music and parties and laughter, and also functions and charity things, and so it's a really, really living place. Gertrude Jekyll said a garden is a grand teacher. Now Helmingham has taught me that. Helmingham has taught me all about scale and proportion, like, the width of the paths, the heights of the walls, the depth and generosity of the borders and the planting. But it also helps to have what must be the best head gardener on the whole planet, and he's called Roy Balaam, and he started work in the garden when he was about 13, and he knows every square inch and has really taught me all about horticulture. I went out when I was as Alan said, when I was very young, 23, 24, and with a spade, and I said, teach me how to dig, and he thought it was unladylike and told me to tie up the sweet peas instead, and I said, no, I want to learn to double dig, and double dig I did. So I learnt my horticulture from him, and also he's very knowledgeable and helpful when I'm designing anywhere in the world, and he always seems to have a good answer. Russell Page's great saying is that the garden must curtsy to the house, and that is also something to be taken into consideration when I'm designing, which I started designing in 1996. I was training dressage with my horses, and my top horses went lame, and I considered that I was not good enough, certainly not rich enough, and probably not young enough to continue, and so I thought I would get going with the designing. So I did a few gardens for a couple of friends that first year, and then, hey presto, I was asked to design Chelsea, which is a bit of a learning curve. It was a main show garden for the Evening Standard, and so it was very high profile. It's rather like, I think doing a garden at Chelsea is rather like having a baby, and I can see that some of you in this room wouldn't have had that experience. But, you get the first 3 months of morning sickness, and you wonder what the hell you've taken on. Then you have 5 months of relative peace and quiet when the garden is growing, you're sourcing the plants, you're getting all your plans finalised and approved by the RHS, and you're travelling around the country sourcing plants, millions of them. And then you have the last month when the pressure is on, and you have 3 weeks to build a Chelsea garden, basically. And then then the baby is born. The last great push, and the baby is born. And then you're looking at it adoringly. You think this is the most wonderful thing in the whole wide world. You've polished every leaf, you're really proud of it. And then the judges come. And they swarm onto the garden like black crows. It's terrifying. And they then tell you that the cot is facing the wrong direction, or the buttons on the baby's matinee jacket is too yellow, and what is the baby going to look like in 6 months? And, it's a very hard thing to do, but it's incredibly, it's marvellous experience. And I'm going to show you, after Helmingham, some pictures of Chelsea show gardens, and then illustrate how the elements have been brought back to Helmingham, where, of course, I probably got the inspiration in the first place. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of Alexander Pope, garden designer, poet, philosopher, who said, always consult the genius of the place in all. I've learnt this because of Helmingham, and it's the first thing I study when I go on site to a new job. Gardening throws us into a timetable beyond our control, ruled by the sun, the moon, and the seasons. But surely the pleasure taken from creating a garden must be just as good as Michelangelo felt when he was bashing out his David. Chelsea brings you ulcers, stressed out marriages, abandoned children, huge alcohol dependency, and sleepless nights and a few white pills by the side of your bed. But there's nothing quite like it when you've polished the last leaf, and the camaraderie at Chelsea is second to none. And actually seeing Jerry in his digger was one of those life-changing moments for me, which of course brings me back to Helmingham. And when I got back, I took my digger driving certificate, and I'm now a qualified digger driver, and I can drive a 3 to 6 ton, 360-degree JCB. Actually, I feel another little creative dig coming up right now, but unless Alan can give me a digger and a lot of soil and a little plot of land, I might have to wait until I get back home. So hopefully we can go on. Here we are. Now, this is my home. It is Helmingham Hall, built in 1490 and finished in 1510 with its wide moat in the ancient deer park of 400 acres that go all the way around. It's an incredibly romantic red brick. It's a half-timbered Tudor mansion, and it's had several sort of facelifts, really, in a way, along the centuries. But thank goodness the Victorians could not build on and make, another floor or build out another huge, ugly wing. Up the drive of these wonderful oaks, which were planted in 1680, and as you drive up, you would never know that the gardens actually existed because the park wraps right up to the house, and here it is, under a typical Suffolk sky. Now this side, this facade, was actually redone, or the right-hand side was redone in the 1740s, and it's our small side. It's actually a very practical house to live in, really, because you've got a big side and a small side. And when we're under 8, we're in the small side, and when we're over 8, we take the ice bucket along to the bar on the other side, and we can live there quite comfortably. This side is the Victorian side, and my husband's great-great-great-grandfather, something like that, had 24 sons and a daughter. 2 wives, and I didn't follow in this example. He raised the canopy of the house and made the Tudor rooms much bigger, which is wonderful for us because it means we've got a big dining room, a big drawing room, and rooms to entertain in. Now, the deer have lived in the park since 1510. There are about 600 red deer and fallow deer combined, and we farm them. We catch up the babies and we put them in paddocks and we take them off to venison farms, and it's quite a business. But they roam the park free, and these are the boys. This is the man's club, and it's wonderful to have them. They'll be dropping their babies in June. Now, I can just explain to you a little bit about how the garden works, because this is the front drive here and the hall with its moat. Now, there's another moat that runs round here, which is the main garden, the walled kitchen garden. And this moat, this one, is separated from the main house by a causeway of yew topiaries. And this garden moat, as we call it, is probably Saxon in origin, because there was a house previous to Helmingham. And the Tollemache at the time came and married the heiress, which they were quite clever of doing in those days. They missed out in the last generation. All I brought was a lame horse. But there was another house here called Creek Hall, and this moat was probably a cattle stockade and housed cattle to stop them being marauded. So, you know, it is very luckily, because it's probably been heavily fertilized since about 1200. On the other side is a new garden, the coach house and tea rooms, because we are a commercial enterprise, and the coach house horse drinking pond here. And then the park wraps around the whole area. So we're going to go to the Parterre first, this is the Saxon moat, and these are the yew topiaries planted in about 1860. Now I love plant combinations, and these are blood red wallflowers mixed with recreado tulips. And the combination is really sort of a little bit clashy, which I quite like. You've got a lovely old pear tree here, and it's backing against the hybrid musk rose border, which we'll see in a minute. There it is in June, planted by my mother-in-law, all the hybrid musks edged with the Hidcote lavender and interplanted with Campanula lactiflora. And I did this parterre for the first thing that I did when I got here. This area is magnificent with all the wonderful repeat flowering hybrid musks, and I've now got almost a complete collection. But there was nothing going on to look down on all through the year. And I wanted something very simple and architectural that looked good all the year round. So I did the box edge parterre, and the obelisks, which copies the brick obelisks which surround the house there. So that is taking architectural elements of the house into the garden. The recreado tulips and the wallflowers have been replaced by Cosmos, Purity, and this is Santolina incarna. This is cotton lavender. I don't know whether you know this plant, but I think it has horrible little yellow flowers, which I always cut off. But I've discovered that if you cut it down in February, March, about this time of year, it grows up in these wonderful fluffy clouds, and you don't get those horrible little yellow flowers. So that was quite a tip I learned pure by accident rather than design. This is the entrance to the wall garden with the Pegasus, which is part of our family crest, and some of the hybrid musk roses. You have Cornelia, Felicia, Pax, Daybreak, Moonlight, Vanity, all those wonderful, wonderful roses which go on flowering until well into the winter. There they are. And you've got a few alströmerias here, but that's the campanula, which can either be a thug or a wimp, I've discovered. It's a thug with us, and really it's actually jumped over the wall and now produces a whole row of this wonderful campanula. And also, if you deadhead it, it flowers again. It's a brilliant plant. But I've recommended it to clients, and there it has refused to flourish at all. So there it can be a wimp if it's in the wrong place. There's Penelope with this campanula behind it. Now we come into the wall garden, and we've got cruciform borders which run all the way down and across, and then the walls, which were built in 1740, surround the whole thing, and I planted up all of the side borders because they used to be just purely vegetables. Now, designing a border, as I'm sure Alan knows, is quite difficult. You've got to think of so many things. You've got to think of flowering time, height, width, foliage, form, what is going to grow, what is going to be happy, how to treat it. And this is the border in early summer. So you've got the Papava Allegro here with the Hesperus matronalis, sweet rocket. You've got Love in a Mist and the Lychnis here. You've got the biennial Salvia and the Eremurus, which provide rockets all the way down. You can see them punctuated all the way down. They are absolutely fantastic and just provide that distinction. You've got roses here. It's backed by trellis of wire work, of which I grow up roses, clematis, everlasting pea, and all those things. White triumphator, which I love. I love this picture because it's just so pure and so wonderful. All the good pictures were taken by two very good photographers called Alan Pollock Morris, who's got an exhibition in Washington at the moment, and Marcus Harper. All the bad pictures were taken by me. Late wisteria on one of the pillars, which I'll be looking forward to when I get home. And this is the border a bit later on. This is the remains of the Eremurus, which continue to look good even though it's not flowering, giving that height. You've got later flowers here. You've got Persicaria, and you've got, what else have you got? Dahlias coming along, which flower all the summer. You've got delphiniums. So it's beginning to get a little bit fuller and stronger. This is a double poppy, which is called Chicago Black, I think. But I rather love it because you've got the little Verbascum chiaxi album. But, you know, I love these details because the little purple inside of the Verbascum just leaps up from the poppy. This is the border Persicaria, again, looking up towards a tennis court. Here's Verbascum, here's a Salvia, and these colours, that's a cardoon, and all these colours are sort of pastel-y in that early summer. The blues, the creams, the pinks, the alliums, the roses, alchemilla here, and it's not till later that you get the stronger colours. Dissecting the garden are arbours of roses. This is debutante and the garland beyond, and roses do particularly well with me. And here is just a really rather stunning combination of Campanula Pritchard's variety, which is a deeper and a very much more striking variety of Campanula lactiflora, with the Verbascum chiaxi and the Achillea cloth of gold. I'm not actually very keen on these strong yellows, but somehow that Achillea drifting through the garden is an important element, and I've grown to like it. Later on in the summer, of course, it's much stronger colours. The heat of the sun, when we get it in England, provides the opportunity to have these strong colours. Now, I used to hate anything with orange in my garden, but now I can't get enough of it. I absolutely love it. And you've got the Helenium, you've got the Lythrum here, Stipa gigantea, the sunflowers, which are the annuals, and the Nicotiana sylvestris here, and you've got the grasses giving that movement throughout the garden. Here is Agastache, short-lived perennial. I don't know whether you have it down here. You do. But it doesn't always survive the winter. Again, Persicaria, giving this wonderful strong feel. Now, I don't know whether you cheat in your garden, but I cheat like anything in my garden. And I have been known when I have an important group of, say, RHS people coming along, to nip out to the nearest garden centre and buy the lily and flower. But I pot up dahlias, and when big poppies, for instance, early flowering perennials, are over, I cut them down and I plant dahlias throughout all the borders. And here is Twinings after 8, and it's a delicious dahlia. And so they continue the flowering season well into the frosts, the first frosts. Here's a rose called Dorothy Perkins, which is a very unromantic name, but it's a very, very old-fashioned, good-flowering rambler rose, and it scrambles all over the fences. And it's a Clematis Juliana praecox, I think, which also does a good job because it bursts through in late summer and covers up all the alstroemerias and things which are over. It is a thug, so you've got to really watch it, and the roots go for miles. But it is a good plant. Now, the borders are backing these areas of vegetable gardens. I don't know whether you've heard of Rosemary Veary. She's very famous. She's dead now, but she did a garden at Barnsley in Gloucestershire, and she was almost the first in England in our time to do a potager and make shapes and make a vegetable garden decorative. And I went there and I thought, oh, how boring am I being with my vegetables? They just grow in rows like this, and I must be much more creative. And then I suddenly realized that her potager was the space of one of these areas, and we have 8 of them in the garden. So I thought it's only going to look fussy and too much, and it's going to drive Roy and the boys absolutely mad by only being able to pick one lettuce from one end and things like that. So these are traditionally grown vegetable garden. Here are the onions laid out in their rows. Dissecting these are some tunnels, which these are runner beans, scarlet painted lady, and they dissect the different sections of vegetables. That's a George Carter design seat at the end. And late summer we have the gourds, ornamental gourds that hang down like Chinese lanterns, and they provide this wonderful picture in August and September. But I did have a little bit of fun with a sort of potager, and I designed these wire work buttresses coming down, which echo another part of the garden, which we'll see. And I just had fun with form and foliage, and lettuce Lolla Rosso, and asparagus pea, and this plant called Sedum reflexum, which is called Trick Madame. It was grown in the 16th century, and I don't know what tricked Madame. Maybe she was given it to get a bit tricky, or maybe she got tricky if she had it, I don't know, and I don't know the history of it, but anyway, Roy Lancaster, who's a very famous gardener, came round and said, I'll be very interested to see if that stone crop flowers, but anyway, there it is. You've got Cerinth there, and we have a bit of fun. We rotate the crops every year. That is Ipomea Heavenly Blue and Star of Yelta, mixed with Mina lobata on one of these buttresses in late summer with a house in the background. Inside the walls there are different themes of these big deep borders that all used to be vegetables, and we couldn't freeze them, bottle them, eat them, sell them, give them away, or even make alcoholic drinks out of them. So I turned them into different plants. Being a plantaholic, you see, it was absolutely ideal. And this is the shrub and grass border, Stipa brachytricha, which is one of my favourite grasses. And again, you know, just to have a purely green structure gives the whole garden some body. This is Nyphophia, I think it's called toffee nose, which I love the name of it. I never used to like these plants, but now I absolutely love them. And I just think the whole combination of this hydrangea quercifolia, the oak-leafed hydrangea, and the round, clipped, tight box balls here, it's a pleasing combination, and I love experimenting. Helmingham's a real trials ground for me, for clients. These are the buttress borders, and these are colour-themed. Here you have red, here you have the gladioli papillo with the Persicaria firetail and phlox. And I think this is the blue, which I've actually mixed with Miscanthus flamingo. And this is a young upstart Agapanthus from New Zealand called Jack's Blue. And it's a most wonderful plant. It has sort of navy blue buds. You can see the buds when it's not quite fully out, and huge heads about this big and flowering later than the normal headborn hybrids. And then at the bottom is what was the peach border, but I had a bit of fun when I got back from Chelsea, and I got some booty from Chelsea, and I got some yew plants and box plants, and I plonked them here, and I said to them, what do you want to be? Now, tell me what you want to be. And so we have an acorn here, and we have a snail here, and we have snowman, and we've got a Wellington boot and a sofa and all sorts of things. And I let the plants speak for themselves. But also interspaced is the delphiniums, which need a lot of space in a border. And because I'm mad keen on planting everything very thickly, the delphiniums actually didn't flower very well and reduced in number. So I've given them their own space between these topiary personalities, and peaches on the back wall, south facing, so we get peaches. There's a beautifully trained fig in the background. Outside the wall is a spring border, and now this is actually limited planting palette. You have these oxeye daisies going in and out of the topiaries, but you've got the straight formal border, and it's tulips, that's not China Girl, I can't remember what that is, with the emerging peony. Then you've got the iris, Mare de Sous with, forgotten, forgottii, don't know-ii, and Felix Cruz and Afterglow peonies. And after that, this border is over. You can just see the bridge going over to the house. Again, wonderful peonies and goldfinch rose. Some of these peonies are very, very old. I think that's Madame something or other. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, I know that's white wings with the Centranthus rubra behind. But some of the old pink ones, they all look quite, there's Laura Desert and Duchesse de Nemours and millions of them. Some of them are very old and unrecognizable. This is on the north side with pillars of these wonderful eagles sitting on the corners and the garden moat coming round the other side. And my tulip border, I don't know whether any of you have got a problem with tulips, but I do. Because, you plant them, you buy 25, and the next year there are 15, and the next year there are 9, and the next year there are 3. And then you find one yellow one coming up in your new patch of pink, and the whole thing looks like a sweetie mix. So I have decided that this border here will be black and white. So you've got Queen of the Night, a white Triumphatus, and it doesn't matter what black ones you get, Black Hero, Queen of the Night, whatever, and it doesn't matter how tall or high, but if you stick to the black and white, then, it will be the same colour palette throughout. The Wildflower Garden at the top. I always think formality should be near the house and informality going out towards the landscape. And this is probably a picture of primroses and cowslips now at home. Then you get the oxeye daisies and the ajugas and wild orchids and grasses later on in the year. There's always a quiet moment in a garden. In fact, Helmingham has taught me this, and so when I'm designing a garden for anybody, it is very essential you have a spot of nothing. You have an area where nothing much happens. And this is the apple walk, again on the outside, on the edge of the park, and the old wheelbarrow collecting the apples in the late autumn. This is where the digger driving certificate comes in. And I was in Virginia planting trees, and I was running up and down, Virginia, America, and I was running up and down a hill and carrying all these trees, and I did my knee in, and I really sprained my cartilage, and so I was told to rest it. So I thought, well, I know what I'll do. I'll get the digger and rest it in that. So I did these yin-yang mounds, and they are sort of viewing platforms for the park beyond. You can just see one of the deer. And our dogs love running up and down it and over it and chasing each other, and children love running up and down. And so this is in a new little arboretum that I've recently planted. On the other side of the house is the knot garden. And in 1980, Lady Salisbury, do you know who I mean? She lives at Hatfield House, and she's mad on Tudor. And I asked her to come and help me with this, because it was long before my designing days. And she said, you must have a knot garden. So I said, okay, but I wanted a herb garden too. So we did the fret here, which is part of our crest, and my husband and I, our initials here. And I saw a carving in the hall over a fireplace, which was wound in and out. And so Roy and I, just experimented a little bit to get this basket weave effect, which is much more interesting than just straight. And all the plants there are plants introduced in Britain before 1750. Beyond is the rose garden, and beyond that is the more informal area. So this is just all the herbs which I wanted near the kitchen, because I didn't want to walk a mile for a bay leaf, and so I've got the herbs. And this is Flora with her garland of roses here, and this window effect, looking through to the formality. I decided not to make an opening through, but just stop people and give them a glimpse. Now, my roses are very important to me. These are all old-fashioned roses, and I planted them, and 4 or 5 years on, they all look marvellous and just wonderful. And then we had a night of absolute torrential rain, and I came out the next morning and they were all lying like this. All the blooms were on the ground, the stems were broken, and I burst into tears and stamped my foot and had a hissy fit and just said, really, this mustn't happen again. And I designed what is the Helmingham rose support. And basically this is what it does. It's you can't see it, which is half the point, but it ties the young shoots down, and it flowers all the way down to the bottom, and also releases this enzyme, if you're a scientist, which goes all the way down to the end of the stem, and it also reaches the light. So you don't just get flowers on the top, but the young growth just comes and flops over, and it looks very, very natural. Now, borders have to work for themselves, and this is the Rosamundi border, and if I've got it, let bend down, there we are. And I have these forget-me-nots with the Ceanothus, which is just a good blue combination. But after that, the Rosamundi flowers, I think she's rather like Barbara Cartland. She's very blousy and pink, very pink. But after she's gone, of course, then we have the fairy rose and the ageratum, the annuals coming up. So that border has to work from April till November. This is the coach house horse drinking pond, planted very simply with flag iris and petasites. Again, very, very informal. There with a big oak tree. It's a lovely, calm. It's one of my favourite parts of the garden. The borders banking the coach house, with the grasses the other side, and this is it in autumn. So a very, very simple, informal walk, wonderful trees. But I have a little place, a special place, under this almond tree, which is my thinking place. And this is where my fire pit is. And I think it was A.A. Milne in The Wind and the Willows who said, sometimes I sits and thinks, and sometimes I just sits. And this is very, very simple. There's absolutely no problem here. These big oak blocks came from one of the old trees in the park, and was pulled down, and I had to be cut down. And I made these blocks, and it's absolutely so simple, because you sit there, and your wine bottle is there. It's not a problem. We've sorted many of the world to rights there, around there. Now, I always think, Rosemary Veary also said, if your garden looks good in winter, you're halfway there. So I'm just going to flick through a few snowy scenes of Helmingham. There are the topiaries with a moat, wonderful reflection. And of course, on the bridge, looking down at the house with the Pegasus and the borders. And that's a knot garden, which I think looks absolutely almost better in snow than it does with lots of plants in it. And that's what I mean about being near the house. This you can look down on from the house. So it's all very, that's a wildflower garden. With its old apple trees and quince trees and medlar trees. And the deer under the oak grove, probably waiting for their feed of hay. Anyway, we're now coming on to Chelsea. It actually gives me a real sort of pit in the stomach even thinking about it. But anyway, here it was on my dressage arena. This is where I pegged out the garden. And these are little Soe sheep which are gambling around and having a lot of fun and making haywire of my design. But this is where because I was so new to the game, I didn't know really what I was talking about. It was like jumping into a great big lake. And this is the plan that came out of it. Now, this is the formal garden. The plot was changed because, somebody messed the RHS round and I had to move to the corner. It was a very, very difficult site, but I had to make a corner garden and something out of this. So I worked with a very marvellous sort of set designer called John Kellett, and we had lots of laughs, and we decided to have a fictitious couple because we had to make the garden real. So we had, I think he was called Richard, who was the husband, who was a banker, and liked to entertain his clients on the formal terrace and look out over his immaculate garden. And his wife was called Octavia, and she was bohemian and liked to throw her shoes off and run wild with the fairies. And this was her bit in the woodland garden, and so that was very informal. So we started work, and we had the classic brick columns which were made locally in Suffolk, and this is what the garden looked like. So I had a few contemporary twists with this terracotta, and little details of these tiles on edge around here with the steps coming off the terrace. And I had, at the end, I had a sort of half moon with some sorbus aria, and these, you can just see them, they're not very good pictures, but there was some wonderful wrought iron panels, which you'll see. And that was the border. So it was all very purple and pink, roses, peonies, alliums. These are Hexacorda macrantha trained on the wall, which is quite interesting. Cranberry cordifolia here. So it was a very, very classic garden. And that seat there was quite amusing because before judging day, the assessors come round and they give more time to the garden than the judges can. I know because I've been on the judging panel too, so you only have about 10 minutes to judge a garden, but you dwell on what the assessors tell you. And the assessors came and sat down on there, and I was planting somewhere around here. And your garden doesn't have to be actually finished, so I was still working on it. And of course, it's a complete sham. It's not a real seat. And this whole thing was going like this. And I was wanting to say, just get off. But anyway, it didn't collapse and it didn't harm them. The Xanthodecia in the middle, the arum lilies. And that's the gate. This is the blacksmith, who's a very eccentric guy called John Churchill, who made these arum lily gates because I just love the shape of the Xanthodecia. And that gate was actually bought by somebody on site, but the panels came back to Helmingham. And there they are, going into the coach house horse drinking, coach house garden with its hornbeam hedge. So they've come back to Helmingham, and they sit there looking, fine, and it just makes a more interesting gate. These are the columns, which are in 3 different sizes, like as in the Greek column, and that's John Kellett, doing some work with the ironwork at the top. And here is he and I, pretending to hold them up. So they are built, and actually the whole inspiration for this came from Helmingham. Here they are back at Helmingham in my Chelsea garden. And I managed to bring 4 back. I had 8. But the whole inspiration came from when I first was asked to do Chelsea, and I was swimming in the pool and looking up and thinking, what the hell do I do? What do I do? I mean, where do I start? And I looked at all the chimneys on the house, and that's where the brick column inspiration came. So they're back at Helmingham, not with the sculpture. That's by a young sculptor called Ben Panting, who's did this picture that we call Eve, because she arrived on Christmas Eve. Garden halfway in the making. So this is the Hexacorda macrantha being trained against the wall. That's the next door garden, which was the Yves Saint Laurent garden, which I had to get Graham to hide up by lots of bushes and things. And this it is at Helmingham. Most of them I sold to the Duke of Norfolk, who had them in his white garden at Arundel, but I managed to keep a couple, and that's where they've come back, and I think frame that seat rather nicely. Don, with some brick sort of obelisks, which have again come back to Helmingham, and you go down into the knot garden, and that's what I put as a sort of staircase and finishing point into the new garden. 2001 was something very, very different. It was a theatrical garden, and I wanted to show that I could be ever so contemporary. Don't know why, really, but this is. I had an amphitheatre. I had a turf amphitheatre, and these irises were my audience. And this is the proscenium arch, and it was all very, very clever with mirrors and reflections and water, and it was very. It was quite edgy, actually. I think it was too clever for its own good, in actual fact. But anyway, the irises came back to Helmingham, and here they are in my Chelsea border called Sable. And again, this is behind the scenes in the theatre garden, rather chaotic, very bright colours. This is L.D. Braithwaite, Rose, and here it is back at Helmingham with Nepeta. So, you know, it was a question of toing and froing with these plants and getting as much as I can from Helmingham and using Helmingham as an inspiration. And this is the sort of water feature. That was the turf amphitheatre there in the proscenium arch. And this was quite complicated, this water thing. But here was just a lounging seat. And this inspiration came from my tree seat at Helmingham, which is just very popular with dogs, children. Everyone loves just sitting on there with the pims in their hand. And there you can see the brick columns of the first Chelsea. So in 2003, the Merrill Lynch Garden, I based this on the golden section. I don't know whether anyone knows about the golden section. It's a mathematical formula of balance and proportion. And I was asked to do this, and this is what you start with. That's it. The turf's been taken off, and that's your bit of land. That's the big marquee waiting to go up. And there it is, that's my car. And that's what you have. That's what you have got to start with. And that's what it becomes. And you've got 3 weeks to do it. So I had a perfect triangle pond here, and a bridge, and a stone wall, a lovely old sandstone wall that I pulled down from Cheshire and brought down. And this is the garden, the borders, and my favourite colours. Aquilegias, amazing things. You've got to rely on certain plants at Chelsea because you never know what the temperature is going to do and how it's going to treat you. Aquilegias are a pretty surefire thing, and you've got to order, if you think of planting 20 in your garden, you've got to order 500 and plant them because they've got to be jam-packed, it's got to look instant. And here they are at Helmingham, all being very incestuous because they all interbreed and do their thing. So they're all over the shop there. And again, here they are, just a few shots of Cirsium rivulare. These are just quite sort of edgy photographs taken by Alan Pollock Morris with the sun on the back. And this is a water feature made by a young sculptor, and I explained the golden section to him, and he seemed to get the drift of it. And this is a perfect triangle of copper, and the water comes up here and goes down on the top of here and down there, but not on the outside. So it was just illustrating that, you know, something from the golden section can work. And of course, here it is, back at Helmingham, planted. The rose garden is the other side. This is planted with the Stipa arundinacea and Miscanthus. And there are the 3 Chelsea gardens brought back to Helmingham, or parts of. And just to end, really, back to the home and the sun setting on the west side, the wonderful shadows caused by water and reflection, and this old place. It's just been such a wonderful family home, and we've had so much fun here. These are the fish ponds looking up at the front. We have a drawbridge that goes up every night. And the oldness of this and the old trees leaning through and the light shafting through the park is something very timeless about it. And I hope that it will go on for a long time. And there is the day after my daughter's wedding. Don't all cry. But there was this wonderful rainbow the day after the wedding, and that is the end of the show.